Welcome to another Jabba's Palace roll call. Today's character, Klaatu. Although I said we're going to be looking at the character of Klaatu today, technically the name Klaatu has been used to refer to several different individual characters as well as an entire race of aliens. I'm going to try and help clarify matters a little bit, but to do that we're going to have to look at all of the green Nikto guards in Jabba's employ, so bear with me. Now, this general design for Klaatu was created by Ken Ralston, who made a concept maquette that featured the familiar green scaly skin and headpiece that we saw in the film. Apparently, George Lucas had requested a lizard man-type alien, and this is what he came up with. The concept maquette was then used as the basis for a full-sized sculpt by Dave Carson, and this was then used to make the latex masks that we saw in the film. The costumes were designed by Aggie Gerard Rogers and Nilo Rodis-Jamero, and of course, this is one of Nilo Rodis-Jamero's sketches. This kind of alien was originally referred to as Woof with 3 O's during production of the film, but they soon decided to call these aliens Klaatu instead, in a reference to the character from the classic 1951 science fiction film, The Day the Earth Stood Still. And I think the name Klaatu referred to a type of alien rather than a specific one for a long time. But more recently, it was decided that the race of aliens would be called the Kadasa Nikto, or Green Nikto. They did eventually give individual names to each of these characters, but these names did get swapped from one character to another several times throughout the years, and of course it doesn't help matters that 2 of them, Klaatu and Woof, were once referring to the entire race of aliens. So if you use the word Klaatu in particular, it's anybody's guess exactly what you're referring to. And if that wasn't confusing enough, at one point they decided that these guys, who were present in Jabba's service as well, would be called Klaatunians. So, yeah. Anyway, for the purposes of this video, I'm going to be considering all of the Green Nikto guards to be honorary Klaatus. So we're going to look at all of them individually. The first one is the one we see here in the scene where Leia is being brought to Jabba. He's there in the background and has kind of a furry skirt on. We see him several times in the film. And, in fact, this is the one probably that has the most screen time. Technically, given the current canon, this guy is now called Woof, but as you will see, he was called Klaatu numerous times in the past. We also see him in the background when Luke arrives at the palace. You can see him here to the right of the screen, although if I show you the full uncropped version, you can see he's not exactly centrally featured here. We can also see him here when the crowd of aliens kind of closes in around Luke. You can see him a lot better in this photo. He's kind of creeping up behind Luke there. This photo was obviously staged, though. It's not a screen grab from the actual movie, so this didn't actually appear this way in the film. This guard is also one of the ones that brings Han and Luke back to Jabba after the Rancor dies. You can see him briefly there in the center of the frame. And here he is as well, leading them out to the sail barge. We also get a glimpse of him on the sail barge as he takes a drink from the drink-serving R2-D2. He's standing directly behind Jabba as Jabba is talking to the prisoners on the skiff. Later on, during the battle on top of the sail barge, we see Luke using his lightsaber to deflect some blaster bolts, and one of those goes back at this guard and kills him, and that's the last we see of this character. This part was played by Mike Stevens, and as you can see, here's a production Polaroid showing him in the costume, and this is a clip from Star Wars to Jedi, The Making of a Saga, a documentary about the creation of the original trilogy. Looks pretty hot in that costume. A big part of these videos is me introducing the merchandise that's been made for these characters, so let's go ahead and do that for Woof here. The first one that comes to mind is, of course, the vintage action figure from Kenner. This one was named Klaatu at that point, and you can tell, though, that he's the same character with the furry skirt that we were talking about earlier. It's actually a pretty good-looking figure, if you ask me. It's got quite a few paint applications, and you can see a nicely detailed sculpt here. And, of course, he's got his furry skirt as well. I understand that the high number of paint applications and the skirt and so forth make it so that there are lots of different variations on this figure, which is kind of a nightmare for variant collectors. Now, I do have this version here, which has the skirt just totally deteriorating. I don't know how common that is. I haven't really seen it very often personally, but it's something to be aware of, that it can happen anyway. One other thing I have that's based on this figure is a Mexican bootleg. I'm not actually sure if this is a genuine vintage bootleg or something that was kind of made for collectors in the modern age. I think it's the latter, but it is pretty funny looking with his white mustache. Only his upper body is articulated and the rest is just one piece of plastic, and it's kind of delightfully crappy in its construction. One of the other things that comes to mind when I think of Klaatu is this sticker from a series of Return of the Jedi stickers made by Fun Products in England back in 1983. I really like the artwork on these. Another vintage product that comes to mind uses that same photo that I showed you earlier with Luke being surrounded by the aliens, and there's Klaatu on the right. This is from Waddington's in the UK, and it included not only the puzzle, but also what's called a super print, basically a poster of the image that's used on the puzzle. Mine's falling apart a little bit, but you can see it there. And of course we have the puzzle pieces as well. In addition to this one, the same image essentially was used on a puzzle from Argentina. It's a mini puzzle, but it's interesting in that the image itself has been flipped. So you can see that now Klaatu is on the left and Luke is facing the other direction. Here is the puzzle itself. So yeah, it's kind of interesting to see him, Klaatu that is, featured so prominently. Of course, I can't forget to mention the collectible card game by Decipher, released in the 90s. Their Jabba's Palace expansion included a lot of additional information about Jabba's Palace characters, including just new names that they made up and old ones that they decided to reuse. In this case, I think this is the first time that they used the name Woof for this particular character. They also made a card labeled as Klaatu, but it looks an awful lot like Woof, and in fact, StarWars.fandom.com says that this is just Woof in profile and has been essentially misidentified by the collectible card game. It may be that they just wanted to make an additional character using the limited photographs that they had available to them, but this kind of thing just served to help muddy the waters further. In 2010, Hasbro released an updated version of the vintage Klaatu figure, known as Woof now, officially, and I remember being pretty impressed with this figure when I got it back in the day. It's just a really nice looking figure, the sculpt is great, and the articulation is hidden well enough that it really doesn't stand out. You can see the paintwork on the face is also really nicely done. My main complaint, or my only complaint about this figure, is that the helmet has a tendency to fall off. And so I ended up putting a piece of double-sided tape underneath it just to keep it on there, as you can see, just kind of a non-permanent solution to that problem. I didn't want to lose the helmet. But otherwise, really good and looks very impressive in a Jabba's Palace display. One final product for Woof, or this version of Klaatu, is this Disney Vinylmation figure. Of course, they made lots of figures, all in the shape of Mickey Mouse, but with different paint. You can see he's got the sail barge there on his ears, so this is, I guess, the sail barge version of Woof, but you can see he's got the little skirt there, and the rest of his outfit corresponds pretty closely with Woof as you see him here. But, if we look on the bottom of his feet, you'll see that he is labeled as Klaatu. So I guess they still hadn't quite gotten their act together in terms of being consistent with the naming of these guys. The next green Nikto guard we're going to be looking at is this one. This one is often referred to as the Skiff Guard version, although he actually does appear in Jabba's Palace several times, but you have to really be paying attention to be able to see him. He's up in the very background here in the scene where Leia's being brought to Jabba, and you can't even really see his face there, but he is standing with some of the other Skiff Guards. In this behind-the-scenes photo, you can see that he actually has part of the costume on backwards, and that may be why it looked a little strange to you in the previous scene. That skirt part is actually supposed to be hanging down the back and not in the front. Because of all the confusion, some people, I think, thought that one Klaatu was actually just the same character with different costumes on, but as you can see, that is not the case. These are different characters. And like Woof, he is there when they bring Han and Luke back after the Rancor's death, but he is, again, way in the background and you can barely see him. And he's also here as they file out to go to the sail barge area, but you can't see his face here either. Although he's called a skiff guard, he isn't actually present on either of the skiffs. If you look closely, there is one other green Nikto guard on the secondary skiff, which we'll be talking about in a minute. But yeah, he's not actually a skiff guard per se. Instead, we can see him up on top of the sail barge there in the distance while Luke is talking to Jabba. But as far as I can tell, the only time we get a really good look at him is during this scene where the guards are fighting Luke, and it's only for a split second right here where we can actually see his face. As far as I can tell, Klaatu and this human guard go inside the sail barge, and so they are not defeated by Luke, but presumably die when the sail barge explodes moments later. And that's the last we see of this Klaatu, which makes it a little surprising that he was prominently featured in some merchandise, as you will see in just a second. I believe this part was actually played by two people. The first is John Simkin, who would have played the part in England, which is the Jabba's Palace section, and then by Corey D. Williams, who is actually the son of Billy D. Williams, Lando. He played the sail barge version of this character, as well as acting as a stand-in for his father, which is pretty cool. So in addition to the character called Klaatu, which we've already looked at, Kenner also released Klaatu in skiff guard outfit, but this is, of course, as I've already established, not one character in two outfits, but rather two different characters, although at the time, I don't think very many people actually understood that. So here is the figure in question, and, it's a fine enough looking figure, I guess, but I do kind of wish we got a different alien rather than two of these green Nikto guards. I'm also never quite sure which direction his weapon is supposed to go. I think maybe I have it upside down here. In any case, if we compare it to the other figure, the Woof figure, I just think it looks better in every way, basically. The Woof one is a lot more detailed and just generally seems better sculpted as well, so I don't know, that's the one I prefer. In 1983, Ben Cooper released this Klaatu Halloween costume for kids, which is pretty amazing considering how minor of a character he turned out to be, but he is a distinctive looking alien. Now this would have originally had some clear cellophane in the front that's since come out, but the costume itself is not in bad shape. Now we should look at the box too, briefly. It's got some really cool art of some of the other characters that you could get. The main characters of Star Wars, including Klaatu, of course. Now, the costume itself is basically just a very, very thin plastic mask, which, if you've ever seen a 1980s Halloween costume, you're probably familiar with. I had several of these when I was a kid. And the rest of it is just a vinyl kind of jumpsuit that kids would wear over their other clothing. Now, there's one pretty interesting thing about this costume in particular, and that is, if you open it up, you can see that it's got a Revenge of the Jedi logo on it. It's kind of funny that they have any kind of logo at all on this costume, and they also have, of course, a giant picture of the face of the character that you're supposed to be on your chest, because that's just the way they did things back then. And here's a shot of it all stretched out on the floor so you can get an idea of what it might have looked like if someone was wearing it. Unfortunately, I don't have anyone small enough to fit into this costume, or I might have pressed them into service. I'm just trying to imagine the situation where a kid would be like, oh, I don't want to be Darth Vader or Luke Skywalker, I want to be Klaatu, yeah, that's my Halloween costume. I don't know. And since we're talking about Halloween costumes anyway, I thought I'd jump in now and talk about the latex masks that have been made for Klaatu. I'm not 100% sure which version of Klaatu these were made for, so I'm just going to kind of put them here and you can make up your own mind. This one you see here is probably the most impressive one. It was released by Don Post Studios in 1997. The original, though, was released by Don Post in 1983, which is what you see here, and it did not come with the hood, apparently, which doesn't quite look as good in my opinion. This video is courtesy of Mortarheads on YouTube. I'll put a link in the video description to the full video that they made about them. And finally, we have this one from Ben Cooper. Much worse quality, in my opinion. Not too impressive looking there. But still, it's pretty impressive that such a relatively minor character has had so many costumes made for him. In 1998, Hasbro released a new updated Klaatu in their Power of the Force 2 line as part of this Jabba's Skiff Guards set. Here they have a kind of a railing that you can use to display them as if they were on the skiff, even though, as we've already established, this version of Klaatu was not actually on the skiff, but I guess no one was paying attention. The figure itself is okay, I guess. It's Power of the Force 2 quality, which is not great, and these box sets tended to be even worse quality than the normal carded figures, but it's not terrible. Very limited articulation. Now, of course, they do have at least the skirt on the right way around. I mentioned the collectible card game from Decipher earlier. Now, they did have a card for this version of Klaatu, but they called him Yats Oren, and as I mentioned before, they already used Klaatu as a name for a different card, so maybe they had to come up with a new one. I'm not sure if they invented this Yats Oren name or not. I think they probably did. But of course, this name was later switched to a different Green Nikto Guard, which we're going to be talking about in a little bit. More than 20 years later, in 2019, Hasbro finally released a modern version of this figure in their vintage collection, and this is called Klaatu Skiff Guard. I'd say it's a pretty decent looking figure, actually. I don't know really what more you would need from this character. Maybe not quite as good looking as Woof, for example, that I showed earlier, but yeah, I'm satisfied with this for sure. And one minor improvement is that instead of having a helmet that can pop off, they have glued it on this time, which honestly I don't know why they didn't do in the first place. In late 2018, early 2019, Funko released this Klaatu Skiff Guard Funko Pop figure as part of one of their Smuggler's Bounty subscription boxes. And I'd say it's actually a pretty nice looking figure. It's got good sculpting for a Funko Pop, good paint, and, you know, of course it's a bobblehead, which I'm not crazy about, but as long as you can see past that, I think he'd go well in a Jabba's Palace Funko Pop display. Now, my weapon that he's holding there was kind of bent when I originally got it, so I took a hairdryer to it and straightened it out. So we've just got two more Green Nikto guards. One is on the second skiff, and you can't really even see him very well except in this shot here where he's kind of hanging on to the side. But he does have a fairly distinctive outfit that lets us tell him from the other guards. So in this scene here, just before Boba Fett dies, and there's the infamous force kick that Luke uses, you can see him for a second here, there at the far left of the screen, moving toward Luke, and then Luke hits him with the lightsaber, and he goes over the side into the Sarlacc. And that's the entirety of this character on screen. It can be surprisingly difficult to pin down who exactly played each of these parts. I think this part may have been played by Julius LaFleur, who's pictured here. I know that he also played a Weequay skiff guard, but I've seen pictures, autographed pictures, that he has signed that are what I think are Corey D. Williams, in fact, so I don't know for sure who played this, but if you have any information, let me know in the comments. They never made an action figure for this version of Klaatu, but Sigma, the maker of these cute ceramic figures in 1983, did include him in their lineup. I actually didn't even realize until I started making this video that this ceramic figure was based on this specific version of the Klaatu guard, but it's pretty cool, and if you look at the screen-used costume, compare the two, you can see that they both have the bandoliers crisscrossed across his chest. They have a little pouch on his stomach, and just the rest of the outfit as well. You can see all the details match up, so this is definitely him. The figure itself is fine. I do like these ceramic figures pretty well. They have kind of a weird, cute vibe where all the characters look almost as if they're children, maybe less so with Klaatu than some of the other ones, but you can definitely kind of see it there as well. If you look on the bottom, of course, he's called Klaatu, but nowadays he would be called Yats Oren, at least according to places like Wikipedia, although there hasn't been any merchandise released that uses that name as of yet. Sigma also released these ceramic mugs for some Jabba's Palace characters in 1983, including Klaatu. Since it's just a head, you don't see a lot of the rest of the costume. I'm not 100% sure which Klaatu they had in mind when they were making this, but I think it's likely that it's the same one that they made the figure for. So Yats Oren today, although of course it's called Klaatu on the bottom there. Nice looking mug. Honestly, I'm a fan of these figural mugs, and it's pretty cool that they have one for such an obscure character, although that's Star Wars for you, right? Our final Green Nikto guard is a little bit different than the others, but I think he's in some ways the most interesting. He is called Giron, and he works with the Rancor Keeper, caring for the Rancor. You can see after the Rancor is killed, they open up the gate, and the first one in is actually Giron. He kind of grabs Luke, and then the Rancor Keeper goes past them both to see what had happened to his pet. After a brief cutaway to Jabba, who says, "Bring me Solo and the Wookiee," they go back to the Rancor pit and show that the Rancor keeper, Malakili, is taking it pretty hard, but his friend Giron comes in, puts his arm around his shoulder, and comforts him. And I think it's just a really sweet moment in an otherwise kind of brutal scene. In the film, Giron was played by Trevor Butterfield, who has played lots of smaller parts in Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. There hasn't been a lot of merchandise made for Giron, as you might expect, but there was, of course, a card for the Decipher collectible card game. I found conflicting information about whether Decipher actually made up the name Giron or whether it was used to refer to the character before that, so I'm not entirely sure. Hasbro released Giron as a figure in the Legacy Collection in 2009, and this is just an excellent figure in every way. I really like it. Everything is outstanding, from the paintwork to the sculpt to the articulation. And, even if you don't want to use him as Giron, the Rancor keeper's friend, I guess you'd call him, you can use him as an extra skiff guard or something, and it would still look really great. I mean, just look how nice this armor looks. I'm not sure how exactly they achieved it, but it doesn't look just like plastic. It really seems to have been weathered. As with Woof, he has the problem with his headgear coming off, so I've put the double-sided tape there so I don't lose it. But aside from that, this is about as close to a perfect figure as Hasbro has given us, I think. I think that just about does it when it comes to Klaatu merchandise, but there is one more item that I want to mention, and that is something that hasn't even been released yet, but I've been given permission to mention it here. Regal Robot is going to be adding Klaatu to their archive collection, and what that is reproductions of the original concept maquettes that were used in the production of Return of the Jedi. I'm really excited about this, and in fact, I'm going to be making an early review video for it next week when it officially goes on sale, so stay tuned for that. It's going to be really cool to take a look at the piece of artwork that inspired all of the characters and merchandise that I've been showing in this video. I hope you enjoyed this look at Klaatu, however you want to define him. I'll have to admit I learned quite a bit making this video, but it's probably not perfect. I may have left some things out. I may have forgotten some merchandise. So if you noticed anything that I got wrong or that I left out, feel free to mention it in the comments. Thanks very much for watching. And my thanks also go, of course, to my patrons on Patreon, including these Palace VIPs, Angelica Brady and Jesper Murtu. If you'd like to see how you can support the channel for as little as $1 a month, you can check out the link in the video description.